How to get started doing ketosis. No, that's wrong. How to get started on the ketogenic diet. This video is to get you going, give you the details you need, and not bog you down in the ones that you don't. The goal of this video is to allow you to more easily and effortlessly enter into the ketogenic diet and succeed on it. Get yourself going, get into it, find your own groove. So I'm assuming you know what the ketogenic diet is, but just a quick recap. We're going to be inducing a state of ketosis, which is brought about exclusively through the lowering of your consumption of carbohydrates to quite an extreme degree, such that your body needs to produce ketones. That's the primary goal. With that in mind, what we are not going to be covering here in any great detail, as it deserves its own video and isn't necessary to get you going, are things like the ketogenic diet alongside other diets and other dietary considerations, or going into specific detail with respect to when to take breaks, how to take breaks, and specifically what foods exactly to eat. I'm going to give you a general overview and you can make the decisions yourself, equipping you with the knowledge you need to thrive. Step 1, the preparations. There are some things that you can do before we get started on the diet that'll make your experience of getting into the diet and doing the diet in its earlier stages a lot easier. These preparations are quite important, and number one amongst them is removing the foods that will tempt you at a later stage from your house. If you were doing a regular diet, you might consider removing the treats and foods that you overindulged in at a previous stage away from your view. Remove your access to them, lower the chances of you failing. In keto, it's a little different. Whilst yes, you will be removing lots of treats and sweets, snacks, chips, etc., you will also be removing all of the foods that contain a large amount of carbohydrates. And we'll go over those a little later, at least in brief. But for now, suffice it to say, you need to remove things like pastas, breads, oats, rice, potatoes, all from your house. Whilst it might not seem like it right now, when in the full throes of keto, when you're doing the diet for a while, it's hard to describe just how enticing a potato can be. Rather than fail at a later stage because you unnecessarily tempted yourself, remove them now. The second preparation I have in mind, which I think is quite useful for many people, although not applicable to everyone, is to find a butcher and a whole veg seller. Find stores that specifically cater to the foods that you will be eating a lot of, which is primarily going to be vegetables and meats, meat products, etc. If you can find a butcher or find a store that specifically deals in these foods, you can often find good prices or buy them at wholesale. You can often find them at the quality that you're looking for, whatever is within your price, whatever is within your budget. Step 2, before we can begin. What are you doing here? How long have you been here? Step 2, you need to figure out how many carbs you can eat in a day. Primarily, your concern is consuming less than the maximum number of carbs that you can eat in a day. So what does that look like? Sorry, I need to find the maths. These numbers. Okay. Yeah, all right, sweet. Okay. So, as established by Dr. Wilder with the original ketogenic diet, around 5% maximum of your total daily calories can be allotted to carbohydrates. So what does that actually look like? For the average male, it's going to be something in the ballpark of about 31 grams of carbs a day. You'll often hear references to 20 grams a day, and I think that is a generally good estimate as well. But let me explain the math so you can calculate it for yourself. If the average man consumes about 2,500 calories a day, 5% of that is 125 calories. A single gram of carbohydrates has 4 calories in it. As a consequence, 125 calories amounts to 31 grams, just about. And that's how we get that number. That's going to change depending on your age, your activity level, most notably, your gender, etc. There are a number of things. My best advice is to go and find a keto online calculator, you'll find one down below, or to find a calorie calculator, another one down below, or if you already know what your maintenance level calories are, simply take 5% of that and then turn that 5% into grams. So the maths would be calorie content times 0.05 divided by 4, and you get a rough estimate. We are trying to never exceed that maximum. These numbers will vary quite a bit, and you'll discover what numbers are best for you as you do the diet. However, my personal recommendations are the following. If you are a man and you are lightly active, you don't engage in much strenuous activity and your job is mostly sedentary, my recommendation would be the lower 20 grams a day maximum. If you are lightly active, or maybe moderately active, you exercise on occasion, or maybe your job keeps you on your feet for a while, then I think that 30 grams is a pretty good bet. If you're very active, and you're doing a lot of exercise, particularly aerobic exercises, you go for runs or ride your bike frequently, or maybe your job has you on your feet moving around all the time, then 40 is a pretty good bet. For women, the numbers are a little closer together, but quite similar. For a female, my recommendations are 20 grams if you're sedentary, much like a man, 25 if you're lightly active, and 30 if you're quite active. Again, you can fine-tune these numbers, but a good starting point for most people is going to be between 20 and 30, and if you're in doubt, try shoot for lower. It's always better, considering failing to meet the number and exceeding it will result in a failed attempt at ketosis. Whereas shooting a little lower and landing within that sweet spot for you, success. Now that we know how many carbs we're eating, we need to figure out what we're going to eat.
Who we're going to eat.
There are so many foods, so many. However, a normal diet will have you consuming any food you want, generally speaking, so long as it doesn't exceed a certain amount of calories per day. Some diets might put restrictions on your access to fast foods and snacks, etc., and those are all good things to do in general, but the ketogenic diet is a little different. We're not concerning ourselves so much with how much we're eating. That'll tend to take care of itself naturally as your hunger tends to regulate itself, and you end up eating significantly less food. What we're concerning ourselves with is choosing foods that are low in carbohydrates and eating enough of them such that we don't exceed our daily amount. So, as a quick reference, the foods that we're going to be cutting out are all grains and things that are made from grains. Think bread, pasta, oats, cereals, etc. Second, we're going to be removing anything that obviously is made of sugar or has sugar added to it. So that would obviously be table sugars, sweet drinks. We're also going to be removing a lot of processed foods that contain sugar as an additive, and you'd be surprised how many do. Next, we're going to be cutting out fruits, or almost all fruits. Whilst fruits are great, they're high in fiber and high in micronutrients and can be a lovely and delicious thing to eat. Unfortunately, they do contain a large quantity of fructose, which, to the body, is just sugar. Other sugary substances that you might not always assume to be sugar, or might not always assume to be unhealthy, also need to be removed. Things like honey or maple syrup. Another thing that people often don't realize is that there are vegetables that are really not keto-friendly. Previously I mentioned a potato, but other root vegetables are similarly so, not keto-friendly. If it grows in the ground, a good rule of thumb is that it's not keto-friendly. Things like carrots, potatoes, beetroot. With some exceptions, they have to be excluded. Now that's a brief overview of the foods that are generally out of the conversation. But what's in the conversation? What can we eat? Or at least, what is it likely that we can eat? Well, all of the other vegetables. Dark leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, many of the nightshades. We can eat all animal products, eggs, cheeses, dairy products, and of course, meats, fish. We can eat mushrooms and other fungi, as well as things like nuts, or many nuts, I should say. Almonds, macadamia, they're all great. So I've given you a good overview of the general foods that you can eat and not eat. However, that's not good enough. We need to be a little more specific, because there's lots of nuances in this. You need to familiarize yourself with nutritional tables. Nutritional table. Within a nutritional table, you'll find a section that has total carbohydrates on it. Below that, you'll see headings like total sugars. Or if you can't find a nutritional label on the package, or doesn't have a package, Google is your friend, and you'll usually be able to find a pretty good nutritional table with very little effort. On that table, the important section are the total carbohydrates. There are some subsections. What's important to you is the one that lists fiber. We're not counting fiber towards the total. So let's say we had a vegetable. I'm actually going to get up a specific reference here. I found broccoli. Broccoli, often listed, will have 6.6 grams of carbohydrates. But that isn't the whole truth, because a portion of those carbohydrates will be fiber. Fiber is inert for the most part, and certainly not worth considering for the ketogenic diet. And so, if 6.6 grams of carbohydrates is the total number of carbs in 100 grams of broccoli, and 2.6 grams of those carbohydrates are fiber, we don't need to care about those 2.6 grams. And so the total carbs that we're counting or considering is 4. A good rule of thumb that is handy to go by is that anything that has 8 or more grams of carbohydrates per 100 grams of the food, and that's 8 grams that we care about. That's total carbohydrates minus the fiber and minus the sugar alcohols. That's a little separate story. We'll touch on sugar alcohols, artificial sweeteners at a later stage. 8 grams of the carbs that we're considering, if it has 8 or more, that's likely not something that you're going to be able to eat unless you're only eating it in very small quantities. Something like garlic. You're not eating 100 grams of garlic. I mean, good God, if you're eating 100 grams of garlic, this video is the least of your problems. You're not going to be consuming the total amount of carbs present in garlic for 100 grams. So, if it has 8 or more, you've got to watch it. Make sure you're not eating too much of it. Certain things, it's alright. Garlic is a good example. Now we have a good understanding of what we need to do before we get started. How many carbs we can eat in a day, or at least a good guess that we can get started with and see if it works out. And we also know, in brief, what types of foods we generally can't go near and what types of foods we can have, and we know how to figure out if it is in fact good for the diet. Considering all of that, now we start the diet. Sometimes it helps when you're doing a diet or anything difficult that you set an amount of time ahead of time that you're going to be doing this thing for. It can make the experience a little easier. So choose an amount of time. My recommendation, 2 months. It's a good starting point. If you like the diet, that's great. 2 months is a good enough time to get into it and really work yourself through some of the earlier problems and issues that you might encounter. It's enough time to get you into ketosis properly and stay in it for quite a long time to really feel if it is for you. When you're done with those 2 months, you can take a break. Be it for a week, maybe a month, and see if you want to do it again. Okay, we've got a time frame. You've gotten rid of the naughty foods. You know what foods you're going to be eating and potentially even know where you're going to be buying them from. Now, we start. You wake up one morning and you don't eat the carbs that you normally would. If your breakfast was eggs on toast, now it's eggs. Maybe throw in a few mushrooms, a tomato or two, some other veg that you might like. It's as simple as that. You don't need to change up the number of meals you eat. You don't need to change up how you exercise and when you exercise. You don't need to change anything else, just the foods. The first day will probably feel like not much. Maybe it's strange to eat them this way. Maybe you've eaten so much carbs in the past that it's quite difficult. Needless to say, it's probably fine. After 1 or 2 days, you've now depleted, presumably if you've been doing this properly, most of the stored carbohydrates within your body, and you're beginning to start entering ketosis. You will probably feel a little lethargic. Particularly your larger muscles, like your quadriceps and your legs, might feel a little shaky, empty and tired. That's fine. You might even experience something called keto flu, a little name given to the experience of grogginess and discomfort that sometimes accompanies the early stages of ketogenic diets. That's fine. It will pass. These things are temporary. Sticking to the diet will usually allow all of these to pass within a few days. If you start feeling lethargic, don't worry. Keep on eating as you normally do. The lethargy will pass. If your legs feel tired and you've been struggling to work out, that's fine. Maybe you have to take a day or 2 off. But within no time, you'll be back to normal, or at the very least, back to functioning at least close to how you were previously. Maybe better. Within usually a week, maybe you've experienced keto flu. Maybe you felt groggy and tired. Maybe you felt the earliest stages of the diet starting to kick in. About a week's time of the diet, many of the positives will start to rear their heads. Your hunger will be massively blunted. You might realize that you've been reacting less emotionally to things. You feel calmer, more steady, stable. You might also find that you're able to go very long stretches without food without ever losing any energy, being totally comfortable skipping meals. That's great. That's wonderful. If you start to experience these things after a week or even earlier, you're on the right track. If you're still feeling hungry constantly after about a week and you're craving carbs intensely and you still feel tired and lethargic, etc., you might need to readdress what you're eating. It may be the case that you're eating more carbs than you may previously have thought, and all you're doing at this point is putting yourself into a calorie deficit, or potentially just a carbohydrate deficit, without actually kicking into ketosis, which can feel a little uncomfortable. If that happens, no problem whatsoever. Simply continue. Now, the ketogenic diet isn't for everyone. You might not like it much at all. And after a week, maybe another week after that, if it's still not kicking into groove, maybe give it a rest. Not every diet is for everyone, and there is no perfect diet. But the vast majority of you, if not all of you, will probably have gotten into the groove by now and be having a great time. Be having a good time! We've been doing the diet for about a week, maybe longer. We've gotten into the groove of things, we figured out some meals that we like, we've figured out the foods that are keto-friendly, that we enjoy. And we've maybe gotten over some of the more unfortunate side effects of the ketogenic diet. We've moved through them, we're feeling great, low hunger, and we're ready to start learning more and getting more out of the diet. That's where the information in this video ends. This video was to get you going. Now that you're in the diet, there's a lot more to learn. A lot of that will be found here, some of it elsewhere. The community is large, and I recommend you look out now. Once you're in ketosis, once you're doing the diet and getting moving, now's the time to start optimizing your experience. At the end of the day, no advice when it comes to diets applies perfectly to every single person. You're going to need to find out what works best for you and what doesn't. This is where this video ends, and the others continue. So we're done here. It's called OMAD, 1 meal a day, Diet of Kings. Just for reference, earlier today I ate an entire chicken. I feel pretty good about that, and I'm unlikely to eat any more today. But tomorrow, another chicken will find its way into my belly.